Welcome back to the Peggy Smedley Show, the podcasting voice of IoT and digital transformation.
Peggy Smedley coming to you live from CES 2020. My guest right now is Paul Wellener. He's the Vice Chairman of Deloitte. Paul, welcome back.
Well, glad to be here, Peggy. Always exciting to see you at CES.
I know. It seems like you're a show regular at CES. We're going to have to make this more official, that we just have it down, and, you're going to become like part of our team. Because, I enjoy having you here and having you talking to us. So let's talk about it. I know that you, at the end of, I guess it was the end of last quarter, the end of the year, the fourth quarter, right? You guys came out with a report, and a lot of things have been going on that you guys have been doing. So I'm not quite sure where we want to begin. Maybe I should start with, why don't you give me your first initial impressions? It's day one here at CES. Have you had a chance to give initial impressions?
Yeah, I had a chance to kind of swing through the North and South Convention Centers and a little bit into Westgate, and seeing this show that I started coming to in the 10 years ago, that was barely touching automotive technology, barely touching smart factory, smart city, connected technologies, and now it's become, an automotive technology, smart city, mobility, infrastructure show compared to where it was a decade ago. So, I saw much more of that than I've seen before. I think with many of the car OEMs here and some of the things that they're doing with their autonomous vehicles, the EV revolution that's taking place, and then lots and lots of that intersection into everything becoming smart. As I said, cities, buildings, homes, there's so much of that smart integration connected to the car. It's really exciting.
So when we look at that right now, do you think that as we move forward, is it the infrastructure we're seeing, the synergistic relationship of all of this? Is it people are starting to understand autonomous because of AI? What do you think has really made the exponential growth of all of these connected devices we talked about?
Yeah, the infrastructure is an interesting one. I'm actually hosting a panel session tomorrow with 4 key panelists with a focus on infrastructure and how infrastructure can support that continued growth of kind of the smart city and the connected revolution. I think we've got a ways to go in infrastructure. We're not there yet because the technologies continue to change and continue to evolve. But I think what's driving the change kind of on the floor here is how rapidly things are happening with electrification. I think that's much more of a push this last year than I think I saw last year. Last year was much more around autonomous, and this year is autonomous is settling out and people are figuring out where they are when it comes to different levels of autonomous driving. But I think the EV powertrains are much, much more real now, and we're seeing a lot more with EVs.
And when we see that, are we going to figure out how you can take an EV from city to city and not just within that state? Because that's kind of the interesting thing, right? When we look at this, how do you then power it? You can go so many miles and then you go, all right, what am I going to do? But how do I figure out I get it to the next, 300 miles or whatever it might be?
People get range anxiety, that's for sure. I still don't have an EV, but I was seriously looking at a couple of the ones out there. And when you pull up the charging networks that are available, they're really doing a much better job rolling out charging networks, particularly along main thoroughfares, interstate highway system, as well as in kind of key parts of urban areas. So I was just looking at where I live in Cleveland, Ohio, and I was surprised to see all the charging stations right around my home in the city. So I think that's, continuing to evolve as well. I think battery lives will be extended. There will be more, charging stations. Charging times will become more rapid. All those will add to getting EVs to a tipping point at some point in time in the future. That's I think the big question that everybody has is, when is that tipping point on autonomous, and when is that tipping point on electrification versus internal combustion engine?
When you look at all the kind of things that are happening, when we look at the technology and the changes that are happening here right now, is there anything that has surprised you so far? I mean, pretty much is all, you've seen in the past decade and the evolution, but is there any one thing with now we see 5G and the exponential growth, is there anything that surprised you that you said, I really am, a little surprised that we don't see this growing a little faster, or that's growing faster than I anticipated?
It's an interesting question, Peggy. I mean, I think there's surprises in probably a couple different places. some of the surprises just are kind of how CES has evolved, right? And they're pretty good at adapting kind of where they go and where new technologies take them to demonstrate them to all sorts of kind of customers and all sorts of spaces. Again, we've got another track tomorrow that's focused on a smart factory. You would never have thought CES would ever embrace something around a smart factory, even 3 or 4 years ago. So, but here we are today, talking to them about some of the things that are going on in factories and bridging that smart capabilities that are in vehicles, moving to homes, moving to businesses, moving to cities, and now into factories. So we're helping them bridge that. So it's a little bit surprising to me how quickly factories have come into play at CES. I think it continues to amaze me of how much of an automotive show this has become. Even so much so that it used to compete with the North American International Auto Show in Detroit, every January, and that show has now moved to become a June show. So there's less of a conflict in kind of new vehicle releases and those kinds of things. So it's exciting to see that kind of change happening. I think the other thing we'll begin to see more and more of, and I'm just starting to see some of that here at the show, is 5G and 6G and kind of the next evolution of wireless technology. I think that'll be a really interesting thing to follow.
When you look at this right now and you talk about what's happening, and you've got a conference that you're a part of that you were talking about, things that you're doing here, is CES getting to be so big? I mean, that people have to try to figure out how they map this out, whether they're coming to figure out the latest and greatest on a consumer type product, or is it really having to evolve itself into being a B2B show? Because you just described smart factory, you described, how does it evolve itself?
It's a great question. I think CES is at a size where it is, for the first time attendee, it's really difficult to navigate. You've got to have someone who almost is like your Sherpa, taking you through the show, guiding you to different places where you can see things and not get, frankly, caught up in some of the cues around moving around, but also get you to the right places where you can see the right kinds of technology, starting in the right buildings, in the right parts of the, kind of the Las Vegas Metroplex, to be able to, see wearables if you want to see wearables. If you started in this hall, this would be the wrong place to start if you really wanted to see wearables and those kinds of things. So having kind of that guide is really important. I think as long as there, continues to be kind of the right kind of separation of the technologies in different buildings, it's manageable. It's almost like shows within a show. If they started to drift away from that and it became a little bit too haphazard, I think you could call it too big, and it would be then very hard to navigate. But the way they've organized it, with kind of different themes, I think it makes it reasonably, it makes it a reasonable thing to navigate.
So looking at this right now, there's building another hall.
Yeah, I saw that this morning.
I was like, what is that going to be? And there's a lot of different shows, like you just talked about the car show moving from January to June and things like that. Will companies try to figure out that very thing? I can only go to this, or they have to kind of figure out where they want to go, or is this something that when you go to a show like this, you figure out how this is going to improve from a business, our life, our health, our homes, our cities? Because isn't that all going to blend together from a solutions perspective?
Yeah, I think it really is. I talk to the CEOs that I work with in my industry practice, and I tell them, even though they might be very industrial oriented, they need to come to CES just to see those different kinds of interactions that are taking place, because work and life and everything is melding together. And this is the place, in my mind, that you see the best integration of that. You see it in the car, you see it in the home, you see it in the factory, you see everything being integrated. And this, to me, is an eye-opener for CEOs and board members, frankly, too, who may not have been, to a show like this that's got as much technology in it. There's a place for the very industry-specific domain shows, for sure, that are, you kind of go much deeper in certain kind of paths of technology, maybe are more equipment focused. There's absolutely a space for that. But as companies look at their spending of discretionary dollars to educate their employees, CES absolutely has a place, in many, many industrial companies, to be able to use it as a way to expose people to all the new things that are happening.
What do you think is you said getting around, you need your Sherpa, it's a little bit of a challenge. Do you think because shows like this are trying to educate and you have to look, is there a way to really understand how the technology is advancing so quickly? So if you are a CEO, how do you get your arms around what's the best investment? Is it IoT? Is it AI, machine learning, blockchain? How do you use a show like this to know from a shareholder investment, how do you make the right in decisions based on coming to a show like this?
Yeah. It's a really good question, and all of those technologies, are kind of front and center with, industrial companies and consumer companies, and how do they get value out of those technologies? And what we found in our recent MAPI study, and we focus this more on the factory versus, on the smart city or smart building side of things, is that those technologies by themselves didn't mean anything to people. We had to create use cases. So we had to say, if you combine AI and analytics and the cloud into a solution that focuses on quality, then you could build a business benefit around quality. And as a CEO, you could then get your head wrapped around, we have to make significant investments in the area of quality, leveraging some of these new technologies, or in preventive maintenance, or in transportation, or in mobility inside the factory. We came up with half a dozen use cases that were the ones that were the kind of most prevalent use cases with the early adopters. We called them Trailblazers in our study. You had to come up with some sort of buzzword for those, that 20% of the companies that are really out there investing in, kind of smart factory capabilities. But those use cases resonated across the universe of people we surveyed, not just those Trailblazers. It resonated with kind of the large group that was in the middle, and it even resonated with some of the ones who were clearly from Missouri and saying, show me. They were the wait and see kind of group of people, but they understood the use cases. They just didn't understand how to apply the technology in those use cases.
Was there a type of Trailblazer in the study? Was there a specific type of smart factory that said, we got what a smart factory was? Was it a type of specific manufacturer that
Well, no, we
this?
surveyed various different kinds of manufacturers on a global basis. So it covered automotive, it covered industrial, it covered some of the consumer manufacturers. It covered a wide range of kind of SIC codes, if you will. And there wasn't one that stood out that was more advanced than others. It was much more the companies that self-identified as Trailblazers, the ones that were making a differentiated level of investment into those smart technologies and able to measure benefits and effectively had a strategy in place that was taking them broader than a cell or a line or a plant to something that they could kind of move across the enterprise. So those were the Trailblazers, and they hit on every different geographic area, and they hit on every different kind of the key SIC codes we looked at.
So was it someone within the organization then that understood security, cyber security, that understood you had to go from outside the four walls? So it wasn't somebody that said, look, I recognize that I'm going to do things within columns, the idea that I'm going to use OT and IT,
right.
That they've got to work together. It can't be these islands of automation anymore. Were those kind of companies across the verticals within smart factories that got that?
Yeah, so we actually specifically asked about how they organized and how they led, those major initiatives inside of, organizations. One of the things that came away, it didn't matter how good the strategy was, it was dependent on people. So you had to have great people kind of around these transformational programs that leverage all of these new technologies and applied them to specific use cases. One of the things that surprised us was that it almost goes back, 20 plus, 30 plus years ago to kind of the early days of the, MRP, ERP systems, and how those started off being kind of led by the IT organization and then got adopted by the business. We're seeing a little bit of that in the smart technologies being led by, in the case of, manufacturers in their factories, led by CTOs or CIOs, but they've got great depth of understanding because they've got a large number of people on their team who come out of the factory, and then they've got the CEO and CFO, the business people on board to understand, the magnitude of the investments. It's important to have the technology people kind of in a co-driver seat or a driver seat role, because when you say blockchain, there's a lot of different ways to go do that. Or when you say smart or connected or IoT, there's so many kind of pieces of technology out there that you really do need somebody who understands the technology to kind of sort through all the different pieces. It's kind of why we're at a show like CES that has all of that stuff here.
How important did partners play in the smart manufacturing?
Great question. Partners played a really positive role in those Trailblazer organizations. They realized they couldn't do it alone, so they had to think about who might be their cloud provider, who might be their provider of certain kinds of capabilities, who might be their professional services partner, who might be their partner in different spaces. So they really did think about the ecosystem and the partnership as a way to drive incremental value. So partnering is definitely something we saw those leading companies doing. Again, they self-identified as, ones that partnerships and ecosystems were more important to them to be able to get to their business cases.
Have we kind of gone full circle? We used to think value chain was very important, and then a decade ago we moved away from it, and now all of a sudden it seems like we're going back to the importance of a value chain, because we got to this idea of a one-stop shop in technology, kind of myopically looking at that, and now it seems like as we build out these IoT platforms, we discover you can't go a one-stop shop. It's not going to work.
Yeah. I think the value chain in the days of lean manufacturing was extremely important. And maybe we did shift away from kind of thinking about, value stream mapping and kind of continuous flow and some of those things. And I think now technology is actually helping us do that again. There's so much sensing that can go on in a value stream where you'll know where pieces of equipment are at any particular point in time, where inventory is at any particular point in time, you understand your customers' demand signals at any particular point in time. So I think we are kind of moving back toward that, continuous flow of both product and data.
Is a lot of that because of now we're going and using edge compute in the cloud, and we're really trying to figure that out? Is that the reason maybe?
Well, the cloud's a big enabler. IoT is a big enabler. 5G is a big enabler, so there's lots of enabling technologies that are all coming together at the same point in time. Just like we talked on the automotive side, it's the autonomous and electric EV technologies coming together to help, kind of drive that to a tipping point. I think we're seeing the cloud and 5G and, some of the analytics capabilities and IoT capabilities all coming together in the factory that are driving manufacturers to a tipping point.
We were just talking with Mo Kataba from AT&T before you came here, and we were asking him about looking at safety being a really good reason for using 5G on the factory floor. I mean, right away, if any manufacturer is thinking about it, that should be their number one reason. When you think about how we can implement safety, did you find some of those Trailblazers that you talked about said, improving productivity, improving safety, being able to have a view of things? We used to say that with HMI and SCADA, we could have that view, but now you can have it in multiple plants. Right. You can make better decisions. Were all of those kind of the Trailblazer views?
Safety was definitely a use case. Quality was a key use case. Lots of things that ultimately drove either improvements in productivity, improvements in output, or improvements in equipment utilization. I mean, those were the things that they self-reported as kind of the benefits that they were seeing above and beyond what others were seeing. So, safety and taking care of your people is again kind of critical in any one of our businesses, but in our industrial businesses it's really important because people can get hurt.
Well, when we talk about construction, that's their number one thing is safety, because we forget. It's the number one thing. People get trained and then they're so on the job for so long.
Construction's an interesting place where there's a ton of automation going on these days.
Oh yeah.
It's even more nascent though than where the automotive space was or the manufacturing space is, because every job site is different. And it's an interesting space to kind of bring technology to the job site, but also bring technology into kind of the design of buildings, so that there's more knowledge of what you're building ahead of time than kind of the digital twin plays a big role potentially in the in the building business.
And we think about offsite manufacturing, and we think about we're bringing two different types of arenas together.
Correct.
When we think about that, which is kind of an interesting thing. So looking at here now, when you let's talk about all of the things that you're seeing, what's going to be, what's your predictions for CES 2020 in the next decade? I mean, I know you probably can't predict, but based on what you've seen, what do you think is going to change here? Smart factories is going to be very big in 2020, but it's not going to happen overnight because manufacturers, just like construction, are very slow to adopt. And there are some predictions that industrial IoT is still going to be very slow in these coming years. Are you seeing that?
No, I think, kind of if you just kind of focusing on kind of how CES is going to evolve over the next couple of years. I mean, I think Gary and his team have kind of done a great job in morphing over the last couple of years, and my guess is they will continue to morph as the marketplace pulls them in different directions. Will I ever see it becoming, a machine tool show? I don't think so. But I think it will become a show that demonstrates lots of different kind of manufacturing capabilities. Will I ever see it becoming a complete construction show? No, but I could see things happening in that space where technologies come together and they kind of build a bridge to show what when you're thinking about a smart city and you're thinking about a smart building, what are the smart construction techniques that you can then utilize? And I can bet there's going to be demonstrations of that in the next decade as we think of kind of 10 years out. I think the real question is what are the things that are going to go away, from CES, because even though they're building a new convention center, you kind of run out of space, and you run out of ability to kind of keep this as still a navigable show. So will there things that you kind of shift and kind of become less emphasized over time? I don't know what those are, but I think that's the only way you can handle it.
So shows like World of Concrete, ConExpo, ConAg, those kind of shows might have to worry that this could be a competitor to those who are trying to be more technology shows and just plain, equipment type shows.
Right. I mean, we've seen in the construction industry there are specific conferences that have started to embrace technology. Obviously in the automotive industry there's, pure technology conferences as well, and there's pure IoT type conferences that kind of take place in the kind of manufacturing or connected world. So there's going to be a place for specific kinds of conferences, but I think a big integrated show like CES is going to have a home for a lot of companies for a long time.
Because there's a lot of things.
Yeah.
Eureka Park, what do you think there? Still opportunity for innovators in bringing new innovation?
I'm not familiar.
That's what they do. The new innovators here at Eureka Park.
Okay.
That's what they call that. Yeah, that's what they call it.
I haven't been to that space.
So they try to bring all of that here, and that's where that idea is for what CES is able to do.
I think it'll be a good one.
So in looking now, we've got in this right now, it seems like here's a little quiet still. Is it day one? You think here at the show in the automotive, some of the big guys here, we've seen a lot of new solutions for the automotive. Do you think we'll see a lot more popping up that are directed towards automotive? Or do you think the bigger automotive companies will be more involved in solutions inside the car, like what Intel does with Mobileye?
I think there's a lot more suppliers here than I've seen in years past. I mean, it's a broad set of OEMs, but the supplier space I think is more developed here at CES than it has been in years past, and the suppliers are here with bigger presences, demonstrating kind of more capabilities, and they're taking a little bit of the lessons that I think they've done in Frankfurt and other places where the suppliers have some technology that they show, but then they have some invitation only space in the back where they actually have some really cool technology that they show people on an invitation only basis.
So that really, when we think about the way things are going to evolve, that's the exponential growth that we're talking about, is really looking at how things are going to evolve in a bigger way, in a different way for the marketplace. So again, I guess it should be interesting.
Yeah, it's
so
an
Paul,
exciting show for 2020.
Yeah, I tell you, Paul Wellener from Deloitte, Chairman, thank you so much. Where can our viewers and listeners go to learn more about what you guys are doing and your report and all the other things?
Well, you can follow me on LinkedIn or Twitter, or you can reach out to the Deloitte Services website at Deloitte.com, and you'll see some of our recent thought work.
All right, well, that's all the time that we have for this segment, but stick around. We've got more to come right here from CES 2020 with Mike Zito of AT&T. We're going to take a quick short break, but you can check out our website at thepeggysmedleyshow.com, or if you want, please tweet at me at ConnectedWMag. As always, this is the Peggy Smedley Show, the podcasting voice of IoT and digital transformation. And remember, with great technology comes great responsibility. We'll be right back.